So we don't have a whole lot of time, I'm afraid to say. So I'll try to limit myself to just a couple of opening questions, and then if we have enough time, maybe we can take a couple of questions from you, from the audience. So, Mark, I mean, we're talking about international security here, foreign policy, defense, security. One of the new issues, in addition to rockets and tanks and military issues, one of the new questions for us is how concerned do we need to be about meddling in our elections, about manipulation of democratic processes that would and have, in fact, in various countries, led to a fall in confidence for the voters, for the larger public. And what, if anything, is your view if Facebook were a country, Mark would be the president of the largest country in the world because you have more users than the biggest countries in the world. So what, if anything, can Facebook contribute to encouraging people to have trust in the system and that everything is being done to prevent the manipulation of our democratic processes? Here you go.
Sure. So thank you. It's great to be here. On elections, certainly there are a number of threats here. What we've seen since 2016, after Brexit and the US elections in 2016, where we and I think, frankly, probably all of the internet companies were slow to understanding the kind of information operations that Russia and others were running online. Since then, we've seen the tactics evolve. There have been more than 200 elections around the world since then that we've played a role in helping to defend the integrity of. After those in 2016, we really looked at this and said, okay, the security landscape that we face is not just one of traditional hacking like we'd seen before. It's now one where these kind of coordinated information campaigns are going to be an increasing part of the landscape. So we need to make sure that we get ahead of that. And we've developed a number of techniques for doing that I think have been quite successful. Mostly developing AI systems that can identify fake accounts and networks of accounts that aren't behaving in the ways that people would. In the last year or so, we took down about 50 coordinated information operations, including in the last couple of weeks, we took down one that was coming out of Russia in Ukraine, and one coming out of Iran that was targeting the US. And we've gotten increasingly sophisticated at working on this. We take down now more than 1 million fake accounts a day across our network. The vast majority of those are within minutes of signing up for the fake account. The vast majority are not connected to state actors trying to interfere in elections. They're a combination of spammers and people trying to do different things, but certainly part of that is a state effort. So the AI systems to identify when accounts are not behaving in the way that people would are really important. The collaborations with governments and election commissions are significantly stronger than they were in 2016 around the world with the intelligence community. There's good, or at least significantly better exchange between the tech companies of signals that we see and threats that we see with the intelligence community and law enforcement around the world. That is going quite well. In the last year, we've seen evolution of the threats in a few big ways. One of the things that we're tracking that we have been quite worried about is that increasingly election interference through these coordinated information campaigns is not just foreign interference of the type that we saw before, but it's increasingly also domestic. So you have political parties in different countries and local actors also trying to employ the same kind of tactics. Some of the same systems around AI and just human operations that we have inside our companies are still able to identify that and identify fake accounts and inauthentic behavior and take that down. But it is somewhat harder because we're not now just able to say, hey, something coming from a foreign country can't participate in this electoral discourse when the interference is coming from inside the House or inside the country. We've also definitely seen these actors get more sophisticated at trying to hide their tracks. So it used to be, there would be a network of different actors who were all kind of coming from the same IP address in one country. And now they're trying to mask their behavior by, at least coming from different networks, often trying to appear as if they're coming from a number of different countries, but the same kind of systems that we have that are detecting this kind of behavior are generally improving in sophistication at a faster rate than the adversaries are. So that's good, but we need to watch out for this. One final thought on this is just a massive effort for us at this point. In addition to the technology that I mentioned, we have 35,000 people now at Facebook working on content and security review. So to put that in perspective, our budget in 2020 on security for these and other kinds of threats is bigger today than the whole revenue of our company was when we went public in 2012. And it's not like we were a small company then. There were 1 billion people using our services in 2012. But the scale of what we need to do on security today is bigger than the scale of what the whole company was just 8 years ago. So certainly the threats are out there. I think we are getting increasingly sophisticated. The partnerships are getting better. I'm more confident about where we are. In the EU parliamentary elections that recently happened, I actually went and testified in the EU Parliament about a number of things that we were doing, and afterwards the President of the Parliament issued a statement saying that he felt like we'd honored our commitments and helped to deliver a relatively clean election online. So I'm proud of the results that we've made here, but we need to stay vigilant. This is definitely an area where there will continue to be threats.
It's interesting for this crowd, the security specialists in this room, that apparently what's going on in your field is exactly the same thing that's been going on in the classic military field. As your offense improves, the defense sharpens up and starts becoming more sophisticated, and that mutually reinforces each other. So is that a process that you see? I mean, you mentioned it already. They are beginning to get more sophisticated. Are you sure that you can, stay ahead of this and catch the bad guys?
Well, as you say, it is adversarial. So we improve, the law enforcement community improves, the partnerships improve. The adversaries are also improving. I think given how little the baseline level of defense against this kind of attack was in 2016, we've been able to improve the defenses at a substantially faster rate than the adversaries have been able to improve the offense. But it is evolving, and like you say, they are improving. So there are different kinds of threats that we see. So moving on from elections for a second, that's certainly one kind of content issue, but we also have issues around things like hate speech. And one of the differences between hate speech and elections is that the people who go out, who say hateful things aren't necessarily getting smarter at saying hateful things. So as the AI systems get better, we generally are just catching more and more of the hate speech, and we're able to take it down. And it's not like hate speech is getting more sophisticated. So I think that as the systems get better, we will get closer and closer to having a lower prevalence of that on the systems. Whereas in something that is adversarial, like elections or election interference, we just need to stay on top of it. And I think we can't take for granted, this isn't a problem that you ever fully solve. We'll keep on needing to work on the defenses. But at this point, I do feel like we're improving faster than the adversaries. And there have been a track record since 2016 of a number of very important high-profile major elections, which I think there have been relatively clean results in an online discourse in that I think can give us some confidence going forward.
So what you're saying is, if I can rephrase this, I mean, I read that in the summer of 2018, you were quoted saying that you would need about 1.5 years to fully, quote unquote, retool Facebook's content and security rules. Now, are you saying that you're not confident that you are equipped to handle these growing threats of disinformation and data abuse?
So on election interference specifically, I'm quite proud of and confident in the progress that we've made because we've been able to test it in different elections along the way. There will always be new threats as well. I mean, this kind of information operations and foreign interference was a relatively newer threat on the internet. Before that, we saw a lot of traditional hacking. We still see a lot of that as well. Increasingly, we see hackers try to target campaigns to basically find salacious information and dump it. So we've developed this program that we call Facebook Protect, which is a free service that we offer to anyone running a campaign around the world so that they can basically give us a list of all their staff in the campaign, and we'll go through the staff and make sure that they all have the highest security enabled on all their accounts, two-factor authentication, that we have more aggressive monitoring on those accounts. And that way we'll know also, and if one account gets compromised, okay, maybe that was a fluke or a random hacker doing that, but if we see 2, 3 accounts from the same campaign get compromised, now we know who all the people are in that campaign, then we know that there's a coordinated effort, and we know that that should be a higher priority for law enforcement and for that campaign to work on. But there are those kind of threats as well. So this type of stuff, there will be new types of threats in the future. We need to stay ahead of those. In general, we've gone through a big transformation over the last several years, where we've gone from being more reactive about addressing content type issues to more proactive. So just to kind of elucidate on what I mean by that. And when I got started, I started the company in my dorm room. And back then, obviously, we could not have 35,000 people doing content and security review. The AI 16 years ago did not exist at the same level that it does today to identify this type of harmful stuff. So basically, the way that the company ran for the first 12 years was that people in the community, if they saw something that they thought was harmful, they would flag it for us, and we would look at it reactively. And for a while, that was reasonable, but then we got to a point where we're a large enough scale company that we should be able to have a multi-billion-dollar effort on content and security review. The AI technology evolved to the point where now we can proactively identify a lot of different types of content, so we have a responsibility to do that. But going from reactive to proactive on this was a multi-year journey. There are, elections is one type of the area that we're worried about. But there are about 20 different areas of dangerous and harmful content that we track, everything from terrorist propaganda to child exploitation to incitement of violence to hate speech to just go down the list. There are about 20 different types of categories. And the way that we judge ourselves is every 6 months we issue a transparency report of how much of this type of content are we finding on the service, and what % of the content on the service are our AI and other systems identifying and taking down before it's reported to us by someone else. So in an area where we're doing quite well, terrorist propaganda, for example, 99% of the terrorist propaganda from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and folks that we take down, our AI systems identify and remove before anyone on our network sees it. So that's good. Right, that's a good result, and we need to make sure that we get there on all of the different categories of content. Some are harder than others. So for example, hate speech is a particularly challenging one because we have to be able to train AI systems to detect really small nuances, right? Is someone posting a video of a racist attack because they're condemning it, which probably means they should be able to say that, or are they subtly encouraging other people to copy that attack? And that, multiply that challenge of kind of that subtlety linguistically by, 150 languages around the world where we operate, and the ability to make mistakes where we're taking down the wrong kind of thing. But we're making progress. 24 months ago on hate speech, we were at 0%. We were taking down proactively, and I think today we're at around 80%. So it's accelerating. It's a hard problem. I don't know if we'll get that one to 99% anytime soon. But as AI continues improving, I think that's a tailwind. And as we keep on investing in the technology, we'll be able to keep on doing better and better on this. But it's a long-term investment.
Let me raise an issue that concerns many people and experts as a problem for society at large. The concern that the algorithms that are being used will create for the democratic citizen not an accurate reflection of all of reality, but sort of a virtual reality, talking of echo chambers and filter bubbles, et cetera, et cetera. Tell us how you think about this and to what extent you believe that that is hurtful to the kinds of societies that we want, where people can have the full picture of information and are not going to be confined more and more to some rather narrow flow of information.
Yeah, so clearly in a lot of countries, polarization is increasing, and that can be bad. The mission of the company is to give people the power to build communities and bring the world closer together. So I mean, our whole thing is about bringing communities together, bringing societies together, and bringing the world together. So I obviously do not want our services to be contributing to polarization. To the contrary, I want us to be a force for bringing people closer together. The way that we do this is by helping people stay connected with the people they care about and build kinds of communities. Most communities people are not worried about. If you're joining a church community or a community around sports, most people aren't thinking, okay, that's going to be polarizing. It's these more extreme ideological communities that I think is what people worry about. And there, you know, I do think we have a responsibility to make sure if there are groups that are spreading a lot of misinformation or have other kind of violations or just kind of polarizing, that we're not recommending that people join those groups. So if you want to be a part of those groups, in general, as long as it's not violating our rules, then that's cool. You should be able to do that. You should be able to seek out the communities that you want. But we're not going to be a force for recommending and trying to push you towards that. Overall, I do think that the narrative and how some people talk about this is out of step with some of the research that has been done. So for example, there have been these researchers at Stanford University studying polarization that have come up with some results that kind of go against what you're saying. One result is that it turns out that they studied the US specifically after 2016, and they found that the parts of the population that were the most polarized were actually the ones that were the least likely to be using the internet at all. So that at least that was not causation, that's correlation, but it definitely at least suggests that that you want to look outside of just the internet as the primary factor that's causing this. More recently, they did a follow-up study. There was a long-term study across many countries around the world, including a number in Europe and the US, Canada, Australia, a lot of different places, tracking polarization over time. And what they found is that polarization is not trending consistently in every place. So in places like the US, it is growing quickly. In a number of other countries, it's growing. In many places, it is flat or consistent over the last 20 years. And in some places, it's even down. But the internet and social media are pretty much everywhere. So if that were the dominant force that were causing polarization, then you would not expect to see different trajectories of polarization in all these different places, which, again, does not mean that polarization, that we don't have work to do to make sure that we're a very positive force on this. But at least should cause some people to question what I think has become a very popular narrative, that this is primarily because of the internet and social media. It's, from a lot of the research that's being done, it's not clear that that's true, but we also have work. We don't want to make it so that we're just not a negative, not negative. We want to be a positive force on this as well.
All right. I'll open for a couple of questions in just 1 second. I have one other question to ask you. I understand that after this weekend with these nice people here in Munich, you're going to go to Brussels. Actually, you could have the discussion with the EU Commission right here, because half of the EU Commission is actually in the room, or maybe somewhere in one of the bilateral rooms. But my question is this. The subject, obviously, when you are in Brussels, is going to be regulation. If so, what kind of? And I'd like to hear from you, what kind of regulation do you think is good for our societies, but also acceptable to the company? What kind of regulation would you suggest should be embraced by the EU? What should be rejected? Give us your sense.
So I think that there needs to be regulation in at least 4 areas touching our company. And they are elections and political discourse around content more broadly, content moderation, privacy, and data portability. And the reason why I really believe that this needs to happen is because there are a lot of decisions in these areas that are really just balances between different social values. Right? What should be the balance between free expression and safety? Right? What is political discourse, and what's the boundary between that and political interference? To what extent do we want companies to be locking down data, and to what extent do we want them to be encouraging them to make it more open, to encourage more innovation and competition and academic research? So I believe what our responsibility is to build the operational muscle to be able to proactively enforce whatever the policies and regulations are, to make sure that we can fight election interference, take down content that's going to be dangerous, have good auditing and controls on the data that we hold for people and businesses, to make sure that people can have confidence in that. But at some level, I do think that we don't want private companies making so many decisions about how to balance social equities without a more democratic process. So I think that where the lines, in my opinion, should be drawn is there should be more guidance and regulation from the states on basically on what kind of, take political advertising as an example, what discourse should be allowed, or on the balance of free expression and some things that people call harmful expression. Where do you draw the line? What kinds of systems should companies have to develop? In the absence of that kind of regulation, we will continue doing our best. We're going to build up the muscle to do it, to basically find stuff as proactively as possible. We will try to draw the lines in the right places. But I actually think on a lot of these questions that are trying to balance different social equities, it's not just about coming up with the right answer. It's about coming up with an answer that society feels is legitimate and that they can get behind and understand that, you drew the line here on the balance between free expression and safety, and not just, okay, is that the right answer? It's not that there's one right answer. People need to feel like, okay, enough people weighed in, and that's why the answer should be this, and we can get behind that. And I just don't think a private company will ever have the weight to create that kind of legitimacy. So that's why I'm arguing for this. I think fundamentally it's very important to build the kind of trust that will be necessary in the internet and in our industry. And even if I'm not going to agree with every regulation in the near term, I do think it's going to be the thing that helps create trust and better governance of the internet and will benefit everyone, including us, over the long term.
Where were these hands up? I think the one that I saw first was Ronan Bergman. Can Ronan have a microphone, please? If I had more time with you, I would have loved to also include a question about Libra, your currency project. But here we goes with Ronan.
Hi. Ronan Bergman from the New York Times. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for these elaborating things that you just said. Two quick questions. The first, and I know you and your team have already addressed that, but I didn't understand the previous explanation, so maybe you can elaborate. If the journalist publishes a story in a paper, it's not just the journalist that can be sued for libel, but the paper as well. If someone posts something on Facebook, I think that your stand is that Facebook should not be liable, could not be prosecuted. In fact, there were a few times when I highlighted to your team of things that were published that were not true, and they said it was not for us to judge if something is true or not. Second question, Facebook and WhatsApp sued Israeli hacking company by the name of NSO, claiming that it used vulnerabilities in order to hack into phones. NSO not confirmed that it was them, but they said governments use our system, our hacking software, in order to catch the real bad guys. So maybe this lawsuit will damage their ability, government's ability, to work against terrorists, proliferators, and other organized crimes. Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of the regulatory framework on content, I do think that there should be regulation on harmful content. I think that there's a question about which framework you use for this. And right now there are two frameworks that I think people have for existing industries. There's like newspapers and existing media, which is the analogy that you drew. And then there's the kind of telco type model, which is, okay, the data just flows through you, but you're not going to hold a telco responsible if someone says something harmful on a phone line. But I actually think where we should be is somewhere in between. I think the newspaper analogy is clearly wrong because there are more than 100 billion pieces of content that people share on our services every day. So the idea that we should have some kind of human editor that goes and checks each one to make sure that it is okay is just not analogous to what happens in a newspaper or other media company. Now, as AI gets better, we'll be able to more efficiently filter out more of the bad stuff. And I think we have a responsibility to do that better and with increasing precision. And I think that companies should have to publish transparency reports like we do on the volume of content that they find or is reported to them, have to publish what % they're able to identify proactively, and should have to show good faith and ability to improve on finding more over time. But to say that we should not have any harmful content on the service, you wouldn't be able to do that and give everyone a voice around the world, which I think would just be losing a huge value. So I think that a third regulatory system needs to be made, which is not the no anything liability for telcos, but is also not the saying that, assuming that there's some number of people who can oversee this in our headquarters, because like an editor at a newspaper, I just think that's not reasonable. To the NSO question, I mean, look, they can defend themselves in court if what they think that they're doing is legal. But our view is that people should not be trying to hack into software that billions of people around the world use to try to communicate securely. So they should try to defend themselves if what they think is right.
Great. We are running out of time, I'm afraid. I can take one more question, and I think the one who's been waiting for the longest is Espen Barth Eide of Norway over there.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. I think this, in a sense, misses the point, because the argument about polarization is that the algorithms you keep confirming what you already think, that you are brought into a universe in which your views are reconfirmed all the time. So it's not really about the individual piece of news or individual content piece, it's the fact that you get more of the same, whereas traditional media, at least the good ones, try to contrast different opinions, which is very important for dialogue. So my sense is that my Facebook is fundamentally different from somebody else's Facebook because we have been clicking differently and we see the same issue from completely different views. Is that wrong?
Well, maybe I can give you some data which will persuade you otherwise. So the average person who uses Facebook is connected to a couple hundred people or more. And the content that shows up in your newsfeed is primarily, it's not determined by us, right? It's things that other people share, right? So you choose who your friends are and what pages and businesses you want to follow, and then that's the content that's eligible to show up there. The algorithm matters because it helps rank things. But most of the conversation is about news. Really what we're focused on doing is, if your cousin has a baby, then we better show that at the top, or else you're going to be pretty upset when you miss that out of the thousands of posts that you might have been able to see that day. So that's the kind of ranking that we do, but it's more about sorting what people have shared than it is about choosing what you see. Now, before Facebook and before the internet, the average person would maybe watch a couple of TV stations to get news, maybe read a couple of newspapers. And you're right that media tries to show some balance of views, but it's also undoubted that each media outlet has kind of their own editorial view and slant that they bring to things. What we see within Facebook, and we've done a lot of social science research on this as well, is that even if, of your 200 plus friends, the majority of the people share some view or come from a similar place or have a same background, you're likely going to be connected to at least some people, 10 to 15% of people who have pretty different views. So the data that we've seen is actually that people get exposed to more diverse views through social media than they were before through traditional media through a smaller number of channels. Now, there is the confirmation bias issue that you say, and one of the issues that we see is that in your social media feed, you'll often see maybe a greater diversity of different types of content, but we also see that people are less likely to click on things and engage with them if they don't agree with them. So I don't know how to solve that problem. That's not a technology problem as much as it is a human affirmation problem in the way that you're saying. But I do think that as more data and research accumulates, the idea that social media and the internet are singularly the cause and are driving polarization, I think is being questioned quite a bit. Again, it's not that we have no part of this, so that we don't have to make sure that our systems do a better job. Our goal is to bring people closer together. So we don't just want to be not negative or not the most negative thing, right? We want to be good. And I think that there's proactive stuff that we can do about helping to show more different perspectives, helping to make it so that it's a good environment for people to have discussions. But fundamentally, I think that that's this whole conference is about a lot of the theme here. The Westlessness theme is about the values that we bring and that these sets of countries bring, and whether the world is going in that direction. And I just think a lot of what social media and the internet are about giving individuals a voice, helping people express a plurality of opinions, being more open about that. It's not clear to me that the world is guaranteed to go in that direction. We do see different regulatory models coming out of places like China that are spreading to other places as well. This is one of the reasons why I think the regulation is so important, because also regulatory models are spreading that I think encode more authoritarian values in more places around the world. I'm very worried about that. I think that we need to make sure that the internet can continue to be a place where everyone can share their views openly, and where the legal framework around this is one that encodes democratic values and open values. And I do think that as part of that, we got to move forward on regulation. Hopefully we move forward quickly before a more authoritarian model gets adopted in a lot of places first. But a lot of that is going to be making sure that we all, including definitely us, live up to our responsibility to make sure that that when people can share informed communities, that is a positive force for bringing people together and upholding these values.
Thank you very much, Mark. As you see, we could go on and on for another hour or two. The interest among these people in these issues is enormous and growing. And I want to say that I'm glad that we started, not just this year, some years ago, to bring in your colleagues from Microsoft, Google, and other high-tech digital companies. And we need to continue to do that. I think a sophisticated discussion about the current and future challenges to our societies have to go far beyond classic military security. So thank you for coming. And if I can ask you one favor, come again next year. Let's give him a round of applause.